Thank you very much.
Hey, Todd, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about ExactData. What do you guys do?
What ExactData does is basically we generate synthetic data, realistic fake data, for the testing and development of complicated IT systems.
So you could make like a bunch of forms, a bunch of records, a bunch
Correct.
of like tax returns, stuff like that.
Correct.
You can manufacture those.
Yes. So think of us as we create excellent, realistic content with a perfectly known ground truth, and think of all the analysis that you can do with that combination as you're developing your systems.
So it'd be like a gazillion applications for something like that. I know I'm interested in cyber. I know we're going to talk about that, but must be so many different things you can do.
Well, there is, and in fact, one of our challenges is staying focused on, let's say, a critical few of those. But we've done currently doing work for the Census Bureau and the IRS, and building these simulator or synthetic data records for the testing of these very complex and important systems.
Yeah, that's super cool. Now, Joshua, you're the research guy. It seems to me it would be pretty complicated to do this generation without just literally making the specification be the output. Is there much difference between speccing what you're trying to do and what comes out at the other end? Maybe that's not even a good question, but how does all that work? How do you do something like this?
So depending on the kind of data that we're trying to simulate, a general characteristic of what we've done is it's usually time-based in some way. So human data is implicitly time-based, and then there are the rates at which artifacts are created by activity, and so you might, for the census, for instance, I could start with the published statistics from a previous census and build a model from first principles that will create a sequence of activity over time for a population, and then flavor each one of those instances of activity with the type of artifact that it produces. And so first you generate a sequence of how many artifacts and what type they should be, and then you concentrate on creating the artifacts to put in that spot.
Do you try and match the artifacts up just sort of syntactically or semantically? Like when you probably cringe at baby sort of generation like lorem ipsum in a form. When you see that, you know those are fake words. But for example, if you were doing a bunch of tax returns, do you put real names or do you put just pronounceable garbage, or maybe you could do either or? How does that work?
Well, so for our models, they're all first principle models, so they're not taking real data and repurposing it, de-identifying it or re-identifying it with fake IDs, but rather for each type of data in the record you're producing, like names, we'll start with what we call seed data, which for names might be a collection of first names and a collection of nicknames and a collection of middle names and a collection of last names, and then have a random selection that picks some values and joins them together. Or if there are some known characteristics of the population that make it not random, we would model those and combine the names in a way that produces a superset which has the same statistical properties as the real population that's being modeled. So a full record for taxes, for instance, would be, you would follow through the logic of the form to create rules and constraints that would guide the process. It might be, you might at a certain point pick a random number here, but then the form itself drives you through a defined process to the next step until the next point at which you have to introduce a new value. Or you might have no connection between the fields that you're doing, and each one's an independent mini little model that just says, in the full population, in the full data set, when you do the analysis, I need to get to this statistical breakdown, And so I'm going to have a function which, I know how many records I'm going to produce, and so I need to achieve the distribution through that many selections. And it creates a modified, the model would create a modified special set of dice, which rolled n times will produce, the n values in the distribution.